Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Colleen Wood, producing branch manager with the Wood team at Hometown Lenders. And today on our Level Up Real Estate webinar, we are talking about higher interest rates and how they can be a benefit to your buyers. We're going to put a spin on what would normally be considered a bad thing and discuss solutions to help your buyers be competitive and successful in this market. Higher interest rates can be an opportunity in a market most people perceive as negative. Right now, in this small window of time, higher interest rates might actually be your friend. So please feel free to jump in with any questions that you have as we progress through these slides. So let's start off by understanding what drives mortgage rates. We understand that what drives mortgage rates is inflation, and inflation is starting to come down. That's the main driver of mortgage rates. Now, it's certainly not in a straight line, you guys. You can see it's from September 2022 at its height, that it hasn't come down fast, but it is coming down. Eventually inflation will continue lower and we will move mortgage rates to more attractive levels. So what's the holdup here? What are we waiting on? Why is it taking so long? Well, shelter costs are lagging. Let's look at what's happening with shelter costs right now. And this is measured by rents and owners equivalent rents. So these are the predominant factors of shelter cost components. As you can see, the cost of rent and owners equivalent rents have gone up dramatically. Oh, I see Abby's joining us. Hi, Abby. She's connecting to audio. So owners rents and owners equivalent rents have gone up dramatically, but after peaking in January of 2022, they've eased up significantly. So you can see here in the height of January 2022, that's when we saw the cost of shelter costs being at their height, but they have eased up significantly. And now the year-over-year rate is at 3%. The problem is when we look at the way that it's measured, it actually counts the last 12 months. So it's going to count that height level that we saw in January. And what's even worse is that although you may have to go back 10, 11, even 12 months, when the survey occurred here in January 2022, it's quite possible that folks could have just signed their lease before that, so it could have been the rent they're paying effectively, but it might be a reflective of where they signed the lease and the first and last months or deposits that they were paying. So you really have a long lag period. It could be even a year, maybe even a year and a half for this to catch up. So while we know in real time that we see the cost of shelter easing, it is taking a long time to get there. The way it's reported in CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, which is the measure of the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. And it's what we look at when we're seeing whether or not we're making any progress in inflation and when we can expect to see interest rates coming down, especially core CPI, which is going to drive the direction of mortgage rates. So we know that there's a lag on the front end of a roller coaster. When it reaches the apex right here at the very top of the roller coaster, the front end is heading lower, but the back end of the same roller coaster is still pointing up. So that's kind of the way that the real shelter costs are behaving compared to where it's being reported in CPI. Kind of a fun little visual there. So here's the shelter in CPI, still shows it going up, whereas real shelter costs are actually coming down. Okay. So here is the way it is being reported in CPI. You can see with the blue line here how it's being reflected in the CPI, whereas the purple line is the apartment list rent year over year and how that's actually changed. So these are two different numbers, two different measurements, but you can see that they're not reflecting the same thing. The blue line is reflecting still a lot of pressure for shelter costs, and that's artificially pushing CPI higher. You can do actually a pretty impactful calculation on this. The shelter component actually makes up 43% of core CPI. So it's a really, really big weighting in just one component of CPI. The difference here can actually be calculated. So if you take the real shelter costs, and the difference between the two, the real shelter costs and the CPI shelter cost is actually 4.9%. And when you take into consideration the weighting, the 4.9% times 0.43%, that actually equals 2%. So it's actually pushing CPI up about 2% higher than it should be. So consumer price index right now is at about 5.5% on core CPI, when really, if they were taking into real-time reads on shelter costs and costs of apartments right now, it should be about 3.5%, which would show tremendous progress in inflation. So the point being here is that eventually it will catch up, but it's going to take a while for the numbers to reflect. Again, a year, maybe a year and a half. But eventually we will see core CPI move lower, and that should help move mortgage rates in a significantly lower level. So now, in the meantime, if you have lower interest rates, what will that do to the housing market? Well, this illustrates home inventory in the current market, and obviously it's super, super tight. If you look over here to the far right, we're going to compare these years, and I know you guys are very familiar with very low inventory, but a lot of people talk about bubble conditions. It's something that I talk with people about every day, so I know you are too. When you look at where we were at during the housing bubble, it certainly was problematic because we had way too many homes and not anywhere near enough buyers. When you look at the amount of homes available in 2007, right there at the top of this graph, there were 4 million units for sale. Today, there's less than 1 million. Now, at the time, at the same time, our population has significantly grown since 2007. So we're in a very, very tight inventory environment. Surprise, surprise. The bottom line here is if interest rates do drop and you see an increase in buyer activity, they're going to be looking at an extremely tight inventory, and that spells even more multiple offers and upside pricing pressure. So even with just that, with the 980,000 units that are in home inventory that's currently being reported, what's not shown is about 40% of those are currently under contract, so they're off the market. You can't really buy them. So when you take a look at active listings of what we can pick and choose from, that's only 578,000. So our population is growing. It's near 348 million people in the United States, and yet active listings to choose from are just 578,000. So that's really, really slim pickings for our buyers. So if you can increase the buyer activity through lower interest rates, and what will happen, that will happen as inflation does come down, there's going to be a lot of upside pressure. So take a look at, from a comparative point of view, this is where, this is what active listings look like now on the far right. And this on the far left represents a more normal marketplace. So January 2017 to about January of 2020 was a more normal marketplace. Certainly real estate values had gone up during this period. On the far left, you could see that, values did certainly go up. We know that. But they really accelerated when there was a low inventory. So January of 2021 is really when we saw values really start to increase. So here we are again on the far right, super low inventory, and now we don't expect the 3% mortgage environment, but somewhere at like the 5% mortgage range should crank up the demand quite a bit in a very low supply environment. So when we look at We've seen home values increase over the last 10 years consecutively. In fact, it's been 121 straight months of home values moving up. But in the second half of 2022, they came down modestly. So it depends on the measurement that you look at. If you look at FHFA, they've come down about 1%. But if you look at the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, they're saying it's 2.7% of a reduction in prices in the United States. Now, these are seasonally adjusted based on, the end of year. We usually see a softer levels of appreciation and even prices coming down a bit. But on a year-over-year basis, home values are still going up. Now, if rates do reach a level that they start coming down, well, then home values will not be coming down any longer. We will start to see them going up, and we're going to see the bottom here in the very near future. So let's assume that none of us are good enough to be able to guess what the exact date of the bottom is. And let's be resigned to the fact that we're okay, that we're going to miss the bottom. We're not going to be able to guess the exact date. So what do most people do? They wait until the bottom occurs and they think that everything's all clear. The media says now's the time to buy a house. And they wait until prices even start going back up before they jump back in, and it feels like it's an okay time to do so. The problem is that sellers become more confident. There's more competition. There's multiple offers, and so you're not going to get as good of a deal. The trick is to see the future before it becomes obvious to the entire buyer market. So if we realize that mortgage rates will drive demand in a very tight supply environment like we have right now, well, then as inflation comes down, mortgage rates should come down. Well, then that's what we want to do, is take advantage of this market when there's a little bit of fear and a little bit of weakness in the housing market, and enter the market before the bottom, because sellers are more fearful right now. They're willing to give you a little bit of a discount. There's less competition, even though the market is scarce. With inventory, it does afford more choices than after the bottom, when everyone's going to enter the market. So this really is the ideal time. So on the far right here, this is before the bottom. This is kind of where we are right now. Sellers are more fearful. There's less competition. We're not gonna guess the exact bottom. I think it's coming up here very, very soon. After the bottom, we're gonna see sellers be more confident, more competition, and obviously we're gonna see higher prices. So let's take a look at this case study here. The last time we had a market bottom, during that cycle, prices were coming down and bottomed out in early 2012. You can see that right there, before starting to move higher. The acceleration up was much greater once the bottom was hit. Once people started entering the market, it really drove prices higher. In fact, in the next year, just in 1 year, from the bottom, prices went up 8%. 8% is really, really robust, but inventory levels at the time in 2012 were at 2.4 million units, and that's right here. 2.4 million units right there. Now we're at this bottom market of just under 1 million. So far fewer homes that are available. So what are we going to get? A similar amount of gain? Are we going to get 8% in gain again once we bounce off the bottom? Or are we going to get a greater level of gain? Who knows? It could be absolutely bananas. It's very difficult to forecast, but I think it's safe to say that prices will be supported. I don't see any bubble popping at any time. Even with 2.4 million homes in inventory, we saw the 8% appreciation in the next year, but that wasn't even with a 3% interest rate environment. So remembering back where interest rates were at, they were very similar to where they are right now. So we didn't have that contribution of having the super low interest rates on top of it, causing, all the buyers to flood into the market and attributing to the 8% appreciation. This was a normal interest rate environment, and we still saw 8%. So let's be conservative and say we only get 3% in appreciation, not 8%, and not more than 8% because there's less inventory, not even 5%. So let's just say 3%. So if you have a home value of $500,000 and let's say you have a mortgage of $400,000, just for easy round numbers, now rates are elevated. Rates are about 1% higher than where they have been recently. So that's costing people a little bit more money, and it's keeping them a little bit more cautious and holding off. We're seeing a lot of bench sitters right now. So the payment increase of at 1% increase in interest rate on a $400,000 mortgage is about $250 or so. Now, if that was over a year and you take that number times 12, it's a little over $3,000 in a year cost of having the heightened interest rate. So that'll be the cost of having the higher interest rate. But hold on a second. Right now, because we're in an environment where sellers are more concerned and willing to negotiate a little bit, a lot of negativity in the media, you're going to probably get a discount. It's reasonable to assume that you could negotiate maybe 2% in discount. So with $500,000 purchase price, you're looking at $10,000. So again, Case Shiller says 2.75% in price reductions. FHFA says 1%. So let's just pick 2% in potential discount in our current market. So again, that's $10,000. So certainly there are ways to be more creative with that $10,000 to get more value with that credit. If you use it towards a seller credit contribution towards your closing costs, keeping more money in your pocket, or towards a temporary or permanent buy down that we've talked about in previous webinars. But there are ways to make this a little bit more valuable. But let's just say we're going to take $10,000 in price reduction. So now we hit the bottom in very near future and values start going up, assuming we're going to see just a little bit, but that 3% in appreciation. I showed you last time in the last cycle bottom, it went up 8%, but again, we're going to just take 3% in price appreciation. So instead of getting the 2% discount, now you see a 3% increase. Or if you bought when you got the $10,000 increase, you're going to see a significant increase in credit for you. So if you add those two together, the $10,000 plus the $15,000, and subtract the cost of paying that 1% higher mortgage, and even throw in the cost of a refinance in there, and we'll just round that to $5,000 because I like easy math. Your $10,000 in savings in credit from the seller plus $15,000 in appreciation, that's a $25,000 benefit. Subtract the cost of your higher rate and refinance, you still net out a positive $20,000 in just a year. So that seems like a pretty good opportunity that exists in housing right now. But the trick is to be able to see that opportunity and then share that vision with your clients before it becomes obvious to everyone else. And then we have the stampede of buyers coming into the market. So that's where we come into play. That's how we help our clients see the vision. And I really, really encourage you to take advantage of this right now. If you have any questions about any of this, I'm always here to answer any of your questions for your buyers. Give me a call if you want to chat about your specific scenario, or if you want to get more in-depth information about this. Talk to you soon. Ta-da!
Very good. I missed the first